two subjects today. One, I want to talk about being pulled down by competition. So if your competition is actually not very good and you are competing with a not so good competition, you run the risk of being pulled down. The answer is you need to change the goalposts. This is one of the things that I'm experiencing right now in my personal life, particularly with my son, and I think it applies to Tesla also. The other thing I want to talk about is, in general, the valuation of Tesla can be looked at in many ways, of course. And one way that we increasingly start looking at is we just look at the cost per mile that people drive. We assume that the cost per mile that Tesla can provide is much lower, but the miles will go up a lot. So therefore, we believe that by 2030, Tesla could have north of 2 trillion in revenue just based on the cost per mile spent globally on driving and the extreme value added that Tesla is providing for people and lowering the cost per mile, increasing the miles. And if you look at it that way, then the stock, of course, has a lot of upsides. This is Nothing Wrong podcast. It's January 31st, 2022. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we're up 10%. The market's up 4%. For the year, we are down 15.5%. The market's down 5.2%. We're underperforming by 10.3%. Let's talk about the competition first. So competition can drag you down. This is a concept that I think is sometimes underestimated in the market. People often look at the market and say, oh, competition is weak, such and such will outperform. And I think that that's, of course, true in a very sort of binary way of looking at the world. If you compete for something and your competition is weak, then you will win. However, in the practical world or in the real world, very often this is not so easy. And the reason it's not so easy is because if you have weak competition, then the perception of the actual market can change and you can kind of go under in a perception of weakness. What I mean with that, let me explain. In sports, my son has this situation right now where he competes within a team. I don't need to mention details, but he has a certain position in the team. He's the goalkeeper of a soccer team, and the other goalkeepers that are perceived to be competing with him are way below his standard in terms of ambition and training. And I don't want to judge the performance, but in generally also the performance on the field. But it's more the ambition, the training, the dedication, the precision, all these things that, in my view, lead to a good performance. My son is way above everybody else. That leads to, of course, him being typically much better and also perceived by his teammates as much better. But when you look at it from the outside, let's say spectators, coaches, we just have a new coach and he just comes and looks at the situation, it's often very difficult for them to perceive that right away. And then when you have weak competition, you kind of almost fall through the cracks. And then it's like, yeah, this is not such a good situation. Let's say the goalkeepers of this team are mediocre. And it's relatively difficult for my son then to outperform right away. Now, what is the solution here? The solution is that you set the goalpost yourself, that you set the standard yourself, that you declare, look, this is my standard, this is my ambition, and I don't care what the others are doing. And I think this is a very valuable lesson also for Tesla. This is exactly what Tesla is doing. Instead of trying to compete with Ford and GM and Toyota and being mingled in the conversation, should there be electric cars and what's the range and what do we think customers want, and all that conversation that the car industry is sort of falling into the trap and the swamp of that kind of conversation. I think Tesla is setting the goalposts themselves by saying we want to achieve X, Y, and Z. For example, we want to have fully automated driving. We want to have lower cost, high performance. And this is the standard. We want to have a better standard of service. We want to have a better standard of design. All these standards, all the goalposts are being moved so far away from the actual market that it's actually very tempting to say that Tesla isn't even in the car market anymore. And this leads me to the second thing that I want to talk about today. And this is really where sort of the rubber meets the road from the hedge fund perspective, and this is the valuation of Tesla. So if we keep moving the goalposts so far away from the, let's say, this is the car market, etc., we will get to a point where we can say, look, in the end, what Tesla is really doing is providing transportation services. Transportation services are priced per mile. In other words, the service that Tesla is providing is not selling you a car. It's not selling you full self-driving. It's not selling you, I don't know, a car that you can charge with electricity or something like that. This is all just meant to deliver one thing, and that is the uh, service of transportation. So transportation is the thing that Tesla is actually providing. And if you look at it that way, then you can say, well, okay, how much are we paying, let's say we, meaning normal people, per mile in transportation? And I think that cost is right now north of $1 per mile if you all include it with insurance and fuel and all these things. And if you look at it that way, you can now start thinking, okay, what is Tesla providing? Tesla is providing the same transportation from A to B, but at a lower cost. We can see that also as customers. And of course, this is a conjecture, but we can actually go and estimate how much that is. And it's, I think, a fair assumption to assume or to expect that the Tesla the Tesla transportation service is roughly going to be half the cost of a regular service. So if the cost is, let's say, $1.20 per mile right now, we believe that Tesla can bring it down to 60 cents per mile. And if that's the case, then we expect a lot more miles driven, and therefore we can then expect a much higher revenue for Tesla based on how much per mile they can collect in revenue. They're lowering the cost, therefore you will drive more and you will pay more to Tesla. This is, in a nutshell, this is the thesis. It's a different way to look at a situation. It's a different way to look at the company. It's a different way to estimate what the revenue potential of Tesla is. And if you look at it that way, then just doing some very basic math, for example, you assume certain amount of miles driven. In our case, we assume about 24,000 miles driven per year with Tesla. We assume penetration of 30% in the US, and then by 2030, another doubling of the revenue. So if by 2026, you have a 30% penetration in the US, so 30% of transportation is provided by Tesla in the next 4 years, 5 years, then we believe that that revenue, which will be roughly 1.2 trillion, can be doubled by 2030. 2.4 trillion, you give it a 4 sales multiple, you discount back, you get a stock price in the 2,500 range. So, of course, this is very, very harsh back on the envelope, but I think the usefulness of this exercise is not to get a precise stock price. What the usefulness of this exercise is to give a sense for the thinking and the way of thinking out of the box and the way of thinking differently, which can help understand why this company can be worth a lot more, and also maybe help understand a little bit why Musk is saying that there is enormous and more enormous value being created. So to summarize, again, for Tesla to become a successful company in the market that they're in, they have two choices. One is to compete with mediocre competition or to set the goalposts themselves. They're setting the goalposts themselves. And one way to think about this is to think about the goalpost being transportation, period, and not, selling cars or selling models and all that stuff. And all the services that come, insurance, full self-drive, all these things are just there to enable an easier and lower cost, more exciting way of transportation. And if we look at it that way, we can then conjecture that Tesla can generate trillions of revenue by 2030, and then also, of course, have a much higher stock price than what's priced in. Let's say if we just look at a basic something like, okay, what's the volume times sales price and all these things. Again, this is not meant to be a precise calculation of the stock or anything like that. This is just meant to open our horizons and think along the lines of what is the business of Tesla actually. This is very Clayton Christensen. What is the job that I'm hiring Tesla for? The job I'm hiring Tesla for is to go from one place to the other. Or in other words, also to enable more transportation, better transportation, lower cost transportation, more fun transportation. All these jobs are being provided by Tesla. And if they do a good job at providing those jobs, then of course we can also see that the revenue can go up a lot. Thank you.